share for a while. We'll take a break and then, so he's kind of got the gist of what we're doing here. So he will give you some breaks, a couple of them along the way. But Brother Joe, thank you so much.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Apple just updated my phone without my permission, so I have a hard time keeping an eye on time. We run about an hour or hour and a half
Yes.
before a break.
Yes, sir. That'd be good.
I can give you a thumbs up.
Yeah.
It is a joy being with you today. I've obviously known a lot of people from this area, this conference over the years at Holmes. A lot of pastors I try to keep up with on Facebook. Don't always have time to comment, but I do click the like button hundreds of times throughout the semester. We're working on a course called Ethics today. I actually use this textbook at Holmes. John Jefferson Davis. I would love to use one by Wayne Grudem, but it's a 1,000-pager. It's the best out there, no kidding. In fact, I even have you a copy of this table of contents.
Wow.
It's really useful. It's hard enough getting students through 300 pages, so we'll talk about that later. And I have a notebook. This notebook that I passed out is just, that's not the course itself. It's mostly a series of worksheets. The students are supposed to read various chapters, and then we cover other topics in class, and I leave space there for them to take notes. So you'll see a lot of places where there's space there for people to take notes. I do spend 42 hours, there's 42 classes. We have three every class, so we spend 42 classes going through that. We obviously can't do that today. So I tried to pick and choose some areas that are more important than others. So I did include something of a table of contents there that I may refer to. We're not going to be able to cover all those topics today. You noticed in your textbook, I don't know what things you would consider most important living in South Carolina, living in America today. Contraception, that's one of those areas that I'm just going to spend time on today. Reproductive technologies, divorce and remarriage. Homosexuality is obviously a big area in our culture today. And in fact, I personally think that that's probably the tip of the spear in a lot of the persecution toward the church. I'm sorry, did everybody get enough book? Abortion is still a pretty big issue for Christians. I don't know how important the idea of capital punishment is to you. What kind of ideas you have on that? I noticed the last chapter in the textbook is racism, and this is the third edition. This is the first year, or the first edition is actually put a chapter on racism in there. So that's a big topic in our culture today. So we'll do some hit and miss. I might even let you call the shots on that if I don't want to bore you with something that you never think about or you don't think is important. I don't want to leave something out in our area of moral decision making. So if you'll turn to page 1, we're just going to kind of talk about what ethics is all about. I think a lot of people feel that ethics has something to do with right and wrong. Other than that, we don't know exactly what it is and what the issue is. So I have a page there with phrases that we see, terms, definitions. But the biggest question in ethics, are there universal rights and wrongs? In other words, if there's something that we can stand up and say is wrong, no matter whether you live in South Carolina or Belgium or China or whatever. Now, see, we do call this Christian ethics. So we have a different standard of doing ethics. So Yes, I would answer that question and say there are universal rights and wrongs. And we're going to have a page on what we mean by that. You hear people talk about doing the right thing. Anytime you hear somebody say, well, you ought not do this or you ought to do this, they're making an ethical statement there. We have a phrase, a lot of bumper stickers and t-shirts on living well. What does that mean? Francis Schaeffer had a series of movies way back in the 80s called How Should We Then Live? See, that's an ethical question. What kind of decisions do we make every day and what do we base those on? A lot of people focus on happiness, how to be happy. What constitutes happiness? Prohibitions, that's the negative part of it. What should we not be doing? I watched the same guy did all the war series. He did a series on Netflix called The Prohibition Era. We went through the gangster time period where alcohol was outlawed in America. How did that work out? You can ask those questions. Anytime somebody says you should do this or you should not, they're making an ethical question. And then another question in connection with all that, well, what if I do this? What if we say this is wrong and I do it anyway? What happens next? Somebody's going to say, says who? Who's the boss? Who are the ones that make up the rules? I mentioned Plato here. He had the ancient philosopher 2,500 years ago had a story about God just in a magic ring. It's probably where Tolkien, series Lord of the Rings, probably got the idea of a magic invisible ring there. But what Plato was doing in the story there, where this ring is becoming visible, what he was trying to say there is that ethics is a social construction and would disappear if people did not fear the consequences of their actions. You could say that in another way. H.G. Wells, The Invisible Man. What would I do if nobody would find out about it? If I could become invisible? They did a remake of this this is one of the supposed classics. They did a remake on that not too many years ago. And it was interesting, the first movie, watching the special effects. The guy's skin disappears and then the muscles start disappearing, and finally you've got blood vessels just hanging there, and then the bone and all that kind of stuff. But then you get into the story, you get past the scientific part of it, and the guy starts realizing that he has power by being invisible. He decides he can go over to his girlfriend's apartment. Technically, she's not his girlfriend, but he finds out he can go there and spy on her, and he can spy on other people. And so there's a power, and you can see his character start to spiral and go downhill through the story there. Being invisible and not being accountable. I can do anything I want to, and it corrupts the individual. Tolkien did something with that with the Lord of the Rings. Whatever you think you're in control of, probably is in control of you. And a lot of power in anonymity. That's why the internet is so vicious. People can say anything they want to. Sometimes you don't know who they are, or if they can get away with it. You don't know what their address is. One more example there. There was a movie that came out several years ago called The City Slickers. There was two guys working in a city. They decided they needed a vacation, and so they went out doing some dune ranching. They were just walking down the trail one day on a horse, and one of the characters asked the main character, he said, would you commit adultery if your wife would never find out? And the guy said, no. Or would you commit adultery if you knew nobody would find out? You could get away with it. He said, no. He said, well, what if by some reason even God himself would never know? Would you still commit adultery? And the guy said no the third time. He said, well, why not? Because I would know it. I was surprised to see something like that come out of Hollywood. There's what is it that drives our decisions? Is it afraid? Are we going to get called or somebody's not going to like us? Well, would ethics completely disappear as a social construction, like Plato said, if people didn't fear the consequences? And so sometimes you have totalitarian cultures, the Nazis, for example, Mao Zedong, where you had individuals not fearing their consequences, and they did anything they wanted to millions of people. So you end up having to ask the question there as we get further and further away from some of the principles that were really in the founding of our country. As we get further and further away from that, are we going to have a policeman in everything that we do? If somebody would have told me 20 years ago you would have to have a policeman not only in middle school, but on the first floor, second floor, and over here, I wouldn't have believed that 20 years ago. That's what happens when you slide past a moral basis for ethics. Well, on the second page there, and we're not going to spend this much time on every single page, but ethics is it's technically a branch of philosophy, and I already probably have lost somebody as soon as I bring up the word philosophy, because that's just not us. We love our ranches and our horses and our cars, and we don't have time to mess with that philosophy stuff. So I left a space there, and I always draw a tree of philosophy for the kids in class. And philosophy is like the basic trunk of the tree, and I'm not going to take time to draw a realistic tree here, but there's all kinds of branches that come under philosophy. For example, ethics is one of those branches of philosophy. It's not philosophy itself, but it's a branch of philosophy. Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy that deals with ultimate reality. Not just physics, but physics would deal with the nature of the universe, science, and all that. But where did the universe come from? And so you got two players on the ball field out there. Has the universe always been here? I don't know. There's no way you could know that. Did it come in existence 13 billion years ago? Well, if that is what happened, something had to explode, right? Big Bang. What was there to explode? What caused it to explode? So this prefix here takes this away from the realm of science and makes it something beyond science. So that's a branch of philosophy. Politics, big deal. How do you bar the incompetent from office? How do you produce a culture that works? Who should be the leaders, and why? And we've been working on that for thousands of years. Plato wrote a whole book on that, the Republic. John Moore wrote a book called, Thomas More wrote a book called Utopia. Are we ever going to be able to produce a perfect society? Why or why not? What are the rules there? I think John Kennedy, for example, took a shot at that with his cabinet, sort of going back to King Arthur kind of stuff. So a lot of people are trying that, but how do you bar the incompetent? And see, in our culture today, what's the biggest word we work with out there today? Well, what is the definition of justice? What makes something right or wrong? How do you bar the evil? And see, what we've done today, I know it looks the same, but what we've done today is we've changed that to social justice. I'm writing too sloppy here, so. And there is a difference. They're almost not even related. We'll maybe try to talk about that a little bit. Another word here, teleology, a branch of philosophy here. This is about, has to do with purpose. Where is the universe going? Where is society going? Is it important that the human race continue to evolve? If you're an evolutionist, maybe we should just get out of the way and let the insects have another go at it, or the dinosaurs have another go at it. But you're looking, this is future oriented. What are some of the purposes there? Something that may not be as important, aesthetics. And that is the branch of philosophy that deals with art and music. See, philosophically is just like we would say, are there universals in ethics? Is there something that would be wrong no matter when in time you are or where on planet Earth you are? Well, can you ask the same question about art and music? Is there such thing as a song out there somewhere that would put goosebumps on everybody, whether you're from Japan or South America?
Philosophers thought so.
What's that?
Philosophers thought so with the doctrine of ethos.
Yes. I heard there was a monk in Tibet that hadn't heard Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, so maybe that's an example. But you look at David's statue Michelangelo's statue of David, something like 30 feet, including the base. It's sort of like what Dr. Benson at Holmes used to call the goosebump test. There's just some music out there that hangs around forever, and there's a reason. There's some art that never dies, and there's a reason for that. Other music is going to die in a week, and there's a reason for that. Sometimes you hear them talking about lost classics. After about 30 seconds, you realize why it got lost. Let's see, are there universals? I'm probably leaving some out here. There's one of the most important ones, we're going to talk about that, epistemology. I don't try to worry about remembering these. We're just trying to show how this is one of the branches of philosophy. But this here has to do with knowledge. How do you know something is true? How do we know something is true? Is it by reason? Is it by logic? Is it by seeing stuff? Seeing, hearing, they call that empiricism. That is when you're using your five senses to verify something. You see it, touch it, taste it, listen to it. Some people say that's not the best way, and it should be logic. The philosopher Socrates said that reason is the only raft that we have to float upon until the gods send us a more sure reason, more sure word of prophecy. Actually, phrase used. Of course, I think we have that in the scripture. So we can know a lot of things through science, but you've got to have some ground rules on how do you go about determining what a fact is. Something very difficult in society today. How do you swim through? How do you break through all the lies that are going on? My wife and I, when Trump did his speech on Capitol Hill, for some reason we had TV on CBSN all about 6 or 8 hours. And I noticed at the end of the day, they didn't. Not one time did they actually play what Trump actually said. They showed pictures of it, and they talked, but they never did actually show what he said. And I'd already gone to bed. Put my bike and all that kind of stuff. I was ready to go to sleep. I said, something's not right here. I went upstairs and played the full hour speech, and he didn't say anything that they were saying. So, 6 or 8 years ago, Michael Brown didn't have his hands up. And yet you had a whole city burned down because we can't keep our facts straight. You don't know what to expect out there. You don't know. We get accused as Christians of not following science, but the stuff they're saying is some of the most unfactual stuff. You're just in a swamp here, trying to figure out how you get sure knowledge. So here we are today talking about this course here, and it's only one of many branches of philosophy. And there's something related. What you do here as a politician is going to depend on how you go about amassing facts. How you do politics is going to depend on what kind of sense of right and wrong you have. So all of these things are interconnected. And so number 2 on this page here, though ethics in some way overlaps with all the other branches of philosophy, it primarily interacts with 2 of these. It interacts with politics, and it interacts with this right here. How do you know what knowledge is, and how do you go about trying to implement a society that works? How do you avoid having something like Hitler's Nazi Germany? How do you avoid avoiding the gulags, the prison camps in the Soviet system where tens of millions of people die? How do you go about defining justice here? So epistemology is how do you know what is a fact, says who. A very simple ethical statement is when you go into a restroom in a restaurant and over the sink there you see a sign that says employees must wash hands. Well, the minute they use the word must, they're making an ethical statement. Have y'all ever wondered what happens if they don't wash their hands? Well, says who? As Christians, do we really believe that one day we're going to be accountable for our actions to God? One day it's all going to be over and it's going to be nobody but me and God. And he doesn't have a bad memory, has access to all the facts, no hiding, no excuse making. Says who is a big question here. How do you know these things? Politics, economics is the other branch. Since all laws assume some form of morality, how will laws be enforced? See, again, you can break the law, but what happens after that? Who will enforce the law? Who makes the laws? So we have ideas of separation of church and state. A law out there on interstate is, you shall not drive over 65 miles an hour. Or what happens if I do that? Well, I usually drive what everybody else is drive, which means sometimes I drive 75. But if I get stopped for driving 75, I can't complain. That's what the law says. Since morality is constantly being legislated, the real question is about whose morality will be legislated. Somebody is going to be making the laws. Somebody is going to be enforcing the laws. So when we get back to justice versus social justice there, what is that? Who defines it? How is it going to be administered? You can ask, for example, you can ask the question, what is an entitlement? Who is entitled to what? Who pays? You see how that's under the system here. Who pays? What is a fair share? They're not paying their fair share. You hear that a lot. What is a fair share? 68%? 69% fair share. With my home's paycheck every year, I can do taxes literally in 2 pages in 30 minutes. And last year, from selling a few paintings and doing a couple of murals, I think my tax return was 33 pages. And of course, I'm still not paying my fair share, right? Neither are you. You're not paying your fair share. Well, in trying to answer one of those questions, the church today has something that 90% of the church age has never had. What is that? You draw a timeline, you go back to the apostles over here, and here we are in 2021. We have something right here that 90% of the church age didn't have. What is that?
The internet.
TV.
Happened about a little over 200 years ago. Strange experiment. God ordains that this people can choose their own leaders. Now, is that not strange? So here we are after 200 years choosing our own leaders. So there's some really good stuff that's come out of that. We've fed a lot of people around the world. We've also done some pretty bad things, right? Why would you have 100 years of slavery if you have Christians picking out their leaders? We're at somewhere around 70 million babies aborted. You know, how could that happen with, did we choose the wrong leader? What did we do with our vote? Did we even vote? See, some of the bad stuff's that's gonna be on us, right? If I could have changed something by, instead of letting him sit, see, this thing about knowledge here and facts, instead of letting my emotions control what I voted for, why don't I figure out what I need to be doing as a Christian? Break from tradition, break from emotions or whatever. You see what God has laid on us. Well, again, I can't go too far with all this, but you see how ethics is a branch of philosophy, and it's related to all of it, but these are where the two spots where the rubber really meets the road. We can really do a lot of good, or we can end up doing a lot of damage. I'm kind of rambling here. You have a comment before we move on? This is just sort of an introduction. Am I walking around too much?
No,
Okay.
I've got it. It's good.
All right. Going on to page 3 in your book there. And you see a lot of space there. I realize we can't sit here for hours and fill in the spaces. I am a Christian, and I assume everybody in this room is probably a Christian, or you wouldn't be doing this on Saturday morning. And so we have a basis for our ethics and decision making and so forth. But we live in a society where there are other approaches. So number 1 on that list, morals are mores. And a lot of people have never run into that word mores before. And that simply means that the traditional customs and values of a social group through general observance have come to take on the force of law. Ethics are defined within the ethnic group. So you pick up certain habits, certain preferences or whatever, and pretty soon just the force of that culture itself, you just end up doing certain things because that's what your culture does.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that could be for good or it could be for bad. One of the problems there is what they call the is-ought fallacy. Just because somebody does something doesn't necessarily make it right. That's one of the problems. Just because abortion is legal today, and it seems to be the normal thing to do, that doesn't necessarily make it right. Slavery was entrenched in culture for a while. That doesn't necessarily make it right. And by the way, making it illegal in 1865, didn't make it go away. There's still plenty of stuff that's part of our Southern culture, that it's just frankly sometimes not Christian attitudes and stuff. And another problem there is if each community is right, there's no way of solving problems when communities clash. Whichever community wins is going to be the ones probably with the most money, the best geography, best resources. Sometimes you don't have to go all that far to see the conflicts. I remember people at Myrtle Beach. This has probably been decades ago. People at Myrtle Beach were fussing about the new trend in bathing suits was what they called the string bikini. And so the people that lived at Myrtle Beach were trying to put the word out there. Would y'all respect our culture? Dress a little more appropriately. Do you think it did any good? Did anybody really respect? No. What do you do when cultures don't respect each other? So that's one of the problems with the mores philosophy. Number 2 there, moderation, the golden mean. That one actually goes back to Aristotle, and a lot of people still think this way. Even Paul the Apostle said moderation in all things. What do you mean by that? you're trying to, you have one extreme here, one extreme over here, and somewhere here we call it a happy median. Aristotle called it the golden mean. It's where you adopt a lifestyle that it keeps you from going into the extremes over here versus the extremes over here. There's a happy median out there. What do you think the Apostle Paul meant by that? I mean, moderation in all things. I can commit adultery if I'm just moderate. No. I can rob banks as long as I don't rob people. No, I don't think that's what Paul was talking about. In fact, I don't think Aristotle was either. But when he's talking about the man living here, Aristotle he sort of comes up with this definition of good right out of the thin air. When he's trying to define this, what makes a good man? Aristotle is going to say, well, a good man is a man that does good things. So then you ask him, well, what good things are you talking about? And he says, well, those are the things that a good man does. So you see what he's doing there, the good man and the good things, he has a circular definition. A good man is a man that does good things. What are good things? Well, that's stuff that a good man does. So the problem here is defining the word good. What's going to be good today might not be good next week. What's good next week might not be good a year from now. So you have a relative definition of good here, and this system has never really been able to overcome that particular weakness. That makes sense? I like the idea of moderation, but I think all of us, having been at Holmes 40 years, you can see how those definitions can switch. We can think of a dozen things that we never thought we'd have to put up with 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So you have a problem finding a definition of good. Antinomianism is simply there is no such thing as right and wrong. Ethics are not prescriptive. You can't say that somebody ought or ought not to do something. Ethics are emotive. So if you think about how many conversations go on about ethics in the world today, theological discussions, and you think about how many sentences begin with that word there, I feel like we should do this, or I feel like that. And feelings, that's an emotive way of approaching ethics. That's not always correct. And one of the problems that comes out of antinomianism is just simply anarchy. You define your own right and wrong there. I think we see a lot of that going on. Communism version in Cambodia ended with 14-year-old kids running around with AK-47s and driving tanks and stuff, just doing absolute anarchy, doing whatever they wanted to do. We've seen touches of that even in our streets in America this summer, just supposedly in the name of social justice, burning down buildings. Many of those businesses black-owned, burning down restaurants and stuff. And in fact, the very first victim in this justice thing this year was an African-American, you probably remember, a retired police officer who was killed trying to protect a business from one of his own relatives. So, antinomianism is not a good way of trying to do ethics. The word itself means no law. There is no right and wrong. Some people go a little bit different direction. Hedonism, pleasure is the only intrinsic good. You try to do what brings pleasure and what avoids pain. You have different versions of that. Again, some of it going all the way back to the ancient Greeks. Life should consist in pursuing pleasure. That That's the ultimate goal here. I'm afraid I might be shortcutting some of the definitions here. You have comments? Have a blast while you last, that's hedonism. Get it while it's good. One of the ancient Greek philosophers, Aristippus, basically his philosophy is drink all the wine you can get a hold of now. Run around with all the women you can run around with right now, because you're not guaranteed the future. So get it while you can, get it while you're young. That becomes a philosophy of life. Now, that you can have some short-term hedonism and some long-term hedonism. So one guy is very short-term. I don't know if I'm going to live to be an old man or not, so I'm going to do everything I can get away with right now. But his teacher, Epicurus, said you need to be thinking in terms, but you need to be thinking long-term. If you drink too much wine tonight, you're just going to end up with a headache all day tomorrow. If you run around with, if you have too much of these sexual things going on, you're going to end up with some deep diseases, and you're paying too much wine, too much of this, you're going to, instead of happiness, you're going to end up with a lot of pain out there. So some of the guys, it's the same ballpark, but some are going for short term, some are going for long term. Now I think that's what moderation is kicks in, and Paul is talking about. Everything, all foods were made legal by Christianity, right? We're not back to, it's okay to have ham biscuit on Saturday morning, right? That's something I enjoy every once in a while. But see, I've also got to think short term. I could eat about 3 or 4 of them, but I also have to think long term, right? I know sometimes ministers cut 15 years off their ministry by not thinking long term in terms of things that are perfectly legitimate. There's nothing wrong with ham biscuits. You know where we're coming from there. I put 2 words at the bottom. Ataraxia is part of that. The idea of tranquility. That means freedom from any kind of emotional disturbance or anxiety there. And that's part of the goal. Freedom from emotional disturbance and anxiety. My wife was telling me they even have a drug, I think it's called Atarax. Call them happy pills. Hedonistic pills. Apnea is the absence of pain.
But Ken, have you seen the need of the moderation in the church and society? Everything's so polarized. It's either everything's this way or everything's this way.
Yeah.
And I think somewhere we're falling in the middle of trying to pull these 2 extremes together and bring a biblical sense,
Right.
and a logical sense to our world.
I try to go to the gym, but I have to fight it. It's not something. Sometimes I have to psych myself up, if I stay in shape.
Like you can't reason with anyone anymore.
Oh yeah.
They've got
I see where you want.
They've got their own way of doing it, and if I disagree with you on one point, it's everything.
It's all
or nothing.
Yeah.
And what?
Well, we were talking about voting a while ago. That's some people just don't. They're just not going to vote. If they can't get 49%, they're just not going to do anything. And sometimes it's we do have to sit down and pull all the cards out and look at what we got. And if however many abortions it is we have a year, 3 million, whatever. Even if we couldn't get it stopped, if we could get that 3 million cut down to 2 million, you're still saving 1 million babies' lives there.
Yeah,
I would love to have all or nothing, but we gotta.
The vote Wednesday on the fetal heartbeat bill, South Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire party walked out.
Yeah.
We can't.
Yeah,
You can't
I
create,
know, it's just
you know?
frustrating.
we're not gonna have our way, we're gonna leave it.
Yeah, we're gonna take the ball and go home. I know what you.
It's a frustrating time.
Again, trying to quickly summarize here, next page 4, utilitarianism. That's just simply the greatest good for the greatest number of people over the longest period of time. You're trying to step back and look at the big picture there, the greatest good for the greatest number of people over the longest period of time. And so some focus on that quantitative part of it, a long period of time. Some people focus on a shorter period of time. In other words, you may have to make compromises and stuff. Some of the problems there is how do we, as human beings, sometimes we can't even predict what's going to happen within a year. How can we predict what's going to happen 20 years from now? How long is the long run? And another thing there, you're back to that definition of good. Different groups may have a different definition of what is good over the longest time period. See, for example, communism is trying to make everybody equal. There's no ups and downs. Everybody owns the same thing. In China, everybody owns one jumpsuit, except if you're a member of the party itself. But you're trying to make sure everybody has the same thing. And so a lot of times you end up simply, you're sharing everything in common, but you end up sharing poverty and misery together. For example, in the Cambodian version of communism, there at the end, people were even being executed for having a pair of eyeglasses. You see, communism is to get rid of the capitalist and bourgeoisie and to put the proletariat in control. If you're wearing a pair of eyeglasses, you're too rich. No musical instruments, no art. Mao Zedong was allergic to flowers, so we're just not going to have flowers. By the way, Mao Zedong talked to Henry Kissinger during the Nixon administration. He said we are going to have a World War III. It's going to be nuclear, and everybody's going to be destroyed, and the Chinese worker is the one going to come out of that. The Chinese workers are going to be the last man standing, so to speak. So, see, the longest good for the greatest number over the longest period of time. We're going to produce that utopia on planet Earth where everybody is communist and everybody is Chinese. You wouldn't believe some of the racist stuff coming. Most people don't make that connection. I went to Bob Jones for a while in school at one point. They were sued by Chinese. His son came to Bob Jones, fell in love with a white American woman, got married. I mean, he just flat out ruined his whole family. That's degrading for you to marry somebody that's Chinese and marry somebody that's not Chinese. Well, that's another course. Pragmatism is the idea of consequences. You're looking at the end result there. You've probably seen this phrase, the end justifies the means. So you've got your goal over here that you're looking at, and how you get there doesn't really matter. You're looking at the end product. And so once you find out what that end is, you go for it with any means necessary. If you're wanting to do some fundraising for your church, your goal is to raise some money, how about if you plant a couple of acres of marijuana? Doesn't matter how you get there, right? As long as we get our buildings, it doesn't matter how we get them. So you can see your ethical problem if this is your only way of doing things and judging things and making it the rules. You see how you lose your definition of good there? You got to have the right definition of good to figure out if that's the end you really want to pursue. When the Israelites were bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, there was Philistines that had it those years, and they were bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. And we got the Ark of the Covenant back, and they go out there and they have a parade. They have all the right music. David's the right man for the hour and all that. And all of a sudden, two guys get struck. Well, one guy gets struck dead when they're bringing the Ark into Jerusalem. Well, what's the problem there? They had the right goal, but God dictated the means on how that Ark was supposed to be moved. It's His way. You don't put it on a cart. It's carried. You don't leave it uncovered. I mean, you can fuss about God's picky rules, but it's one thing to have the end and the goal there, but it's another thing to do things the way God uses all His rules. And you're probably wondering, where are we in America? We look at all these points here. There's, in fact, I had another one there, situation ethics. A lot of them. Where are Christians at on doing their ethics today? We try to do our ethics by the book, right? Where are we in America today? All of the above. Do you also see how some Christians have a hybrid ethics? You know, we want to do it the right way, but sometimes we do whatever feels good. We make plans sometimes without consulting God. Get a little too pragmatic. The situation ethics thing was a guy back in the 60s who wrote a book, Joseph Fletcher, I put his name there, Situation Ethics, where he says the principle there, see, it sounds better than all the other stuff. Love is the basis for deciding anything. And that sounds really good on the surface. Think about it for a second. Well, what would be a problem if this is your only methodology, your only goal? What would be a problem there?
You run into euthanasia. I love this one, and I don't want them to suffer, so
Okay.
let's allow them to.
Yeah, you might pull the plug a little too soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one of those hearts on my driver's license. If I've been in a car wreck or something, of course, the parts are getting to be 67 years old now. I don't know. It might not be worth that much, but they can have anything that's there about, give me don't push it too fast, give me a shot at the hospital bed first. What would be some other ways? I'll give you one of Joseph Fletcher's. If you're a minister counseling a woman, and it's okay if you sleep with that woman if she needs it. You see where he took that? He ended up seducing a bunch of women at the end of his life. And another thing that's so annoying about this, when you have discussions on abortion on the international scene, back when we were still reading Time magazine, that sort of thing. Anytime the world wanted to know something about abortion, they would ask Joseph Fletcher because he's the Episcopalian bishop. And of course, see, you don't want to love. You wouldn't want to cause anybody to have to carry a pregnancy through. If you really love your daughter, you would abort that baby for her. And see, the problem in all of this is when we talk about love as Christians, love is always connected with truth and Scripture. In fact, God's word is what defines love and gives examples of love. That's right. You can't just take that emotion anywhere and say, well, we're doing this out of love. You've got to be careful. I feel like I'm doing a bunch of stuff unsaid, but we probably need to go on. All right, one more page here. Page 5 is where we finally bring it down to what we call Christian ethics here. And if you're on page 5, it looks like a big long word, don't pay too much attention to it. It just simply means that ethics exists because of duty, necessity, obligation. It means ethics that are imposed by an external source. That's what that word means. So I break down that word in the Greek class and all that. See, in these other areas, sometimes you vote on it. Sometimes you go by your feelings. Sometimes you go by what's going to get you the best profit in your business at the end of the year or whatever. But when it comes down to Christian ethics, we don't vote on it, right? You can't just pick out something and say, well, we got 51% majority here, we can run with it. That's not the way God's ethics works. You can't violate God's ethics because, well, I just don't feel like doing that. You know, I'm too lazy, or I'm gonna leave this. I know TurboTax is wanting me to put this in on these lines here, but I'm gonna leave that out because I don't. You see how we can't do ethics like that as a Christian. I'm going to take the time here to go into the definitions of inspiration, but we believe that the scriptures are inspired. It's our authority. So God has the right, as God, to impose his ethical system on us. And technically, we don't have anything to worry about if we do it because it's based on the character of God. That's where the definitions come from. So the truth that is revealed here is what defines this over here. It defines what it is, how it works, gives examples of how it works. So it has, first of all, to do with character. It involves transformation of our being. We're moving from one character to another. Formation, development, maturing in Christ. And it affects character. The very Saturday morning that I woke up, I got saved in a revival sort of service on Friday night. Woke up Saturday morning, and now I've got the first ethic question right in the face there. What am I going to do with this bag of marijuana here? The new nature in there has already started bugging me. You know, it's already kicking in against the old nature. Number 2, just in case you're wondering, I got in my little Spitfire and went down the road with the top down. And I shook out back grass in the breeze. So this system of ethics is imposed on us that involves character, it involves community. You can't live. You can be a pretty good guy if you don't ever have to face any other human beings during the day. You'll be sanctified until you face brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so. So that character is worked out in a community and an environment. A really big word in the New Testament, koinonia, that's your word for community. That's your covenant, your interaction, your shared experiences. You wouldn't believe how many times I run into people and home students, from years ago, and I say, what you doing now? Where are you going to church? I'm like, well, I'm not going in church. My wife and I are doing YouTube church. You can get some good stuff on that, but that's never going to be a replacement. That's why the writer of Hebrews says, "Don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together here." We need to be in here together, as John Lennon would say, warts and all. That's what koinonia is. It's sharing in our problems, our tears, our fears, joys, and all that. We're in this together as a community. And the word there, praxis, by the way, that's what in the plural, that's what the book of Acts, the title is on the book of Acts. It means deeds, actions, practices, reflective actions. So that's purposeful, informed, circumspection, action in the world, participating with God. That's part of our community living out stuff. Critical thinking.
Your brother Joe.
Yes.
The community is one of the things that this COVID virus has.
Oh yeah.
stripped
Oh yeah. It's
the church from.
Yeah. It's hitting them too really hard there.
And as a pastor, I'm deeply concerned
Yeah.
about what will be left
Opposite.
Well, they first said that 20% are probably never coming back. Now they're saying maybe a third are never coming back. So it's definitely not good. That's another class, you know. That's exactly right, though. Responsibility and challenge, it doesn't just relate to our community here, but also the broader context of the world. Decision-making in politics and social dimensions. If the prevailing popular culture sets the agenda, then Christianity loses its influence and its distinctiveness. We should be a contrast society, not a counterculture, not a subculture. We don't just do everything everybody else is doing, put Christian in front of it.
That's right.
It's a contrast society. The early Christians didn't do what the Romans did and try to label that as Christianity. They were always seen as that contrast counterculture. And last but not least, accountability. As I said a while ago, one day it's just to be me and God personally, eyeball to eyeball. What did I do? What did I say? Accountability. So these ethics are not determined. In other words, we don't go to culture to get the definitions. We don't vote on it. We don't. It's not what we feel. It's not the bottom line in the business or whatever. It's God's ethics. God. He imposes it on us. We don't invent it. We don't come up with it. We don't negotiate with it. All right. 10:08. We go. Next idea.
Maybe a few more minutes.
Okay.
Or you want to break?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Go a few more minutes.
Okay. The next section in there, I don't know if we should spend a whole lot of time on this. I have a thing called evolution and ethics. And what that is dealing with there, page 6 and 7. And if we really are evolved from something similar to an ape, like 3 million years ago, where do you get your definition of ethics from? See, I don't think we are. I've just spent about 6 hours on YouTube videos listening to Sam Harris, the most prominent atheist on planet Earth right now, is debating Jordan Peterson. See, Sam Harris, as an atheist, he wants an ethic in the world. He said, how do we avoid another Hitler? What can we do to keep from wasting our lives? He said, all of my life, I've seen Christians wasting their lives doing this when they could be doing this. They're wasting their energy and their resources. So how do we stop from doing that? How do we prevent another Hitler? But he could never quite come up with. Some people have problems defining love, defining what good is and all that. But Sam Harris, the most prominent atheist, cannot define where evil comes from. And if you're simply a product of evolution, just random colliding molecules and atoms, and over a period of 3 million years, that transformed us from some apish little thing, about 3 feet high. Where in all of those randomly colliding atoms do you get a definition of evil? At the end of the day, and I've noticed 6 hours him lecturing on this, at the end of the day, it's easy to say, I don't like this, but there is no solid foundation he can give for what it is he likes. At the end of the day, Hitler killing 10 million people is no different than going out in the field there and watching an army of black ants go over and wipe out an army of red ants. You might not like that, but you can't say that ought to be or ought not to be just by looking at nature itself. You can't look at a neutral world of nothing but molecules and atoms and get these sort of things out of that. And I don't know how much more time I need to spend listening to it, but I don't think he's gonna be able to go anywhere with himself. He obviously has preferences and seems to be like a good guy and all that kind of stuff, but he ultimately has no basis for determining what's evil or even good. It's just personal preferences. And ultimately, it's going to be the guy that carries the biggest stick. That's what evolution kicks up, the survival of the fittest, right? Well, that's sort of what that page is about there. This right here is something, it's hard. Everybody lives with this. Where did this kind of stuff come from? It's something that hangs over us. If I know I ought not to do something, there's something there that's invisible that hangs over me. Then if I go ahead and do that, something even heavier than that comes over us, right? That is a moral category that's been put into human beings by God. We didn't evolve that out of the genetic structure from apes. And so it's like a voice speaking there. We can't figure out where it comes from if you're just leaning on evolution. Well, they can't define what we call ethical pain or guilt. I don't care who you are. If you go to McDonald's and you're standing in line and somebody breaks in front of you, I don't care if it's Sam Harris or who it is. Something in there says that person ought not to have done that. Do you guys remember the Napster flap a few years ago? It's where they first started putting music on the internet, and all of a sudden you could just get with your friends and you can download stuff for free. Well, guess who two of the biggest protesters were? Metallica and Madonna. Madonna, the same lady that trashed a whole little generation of little girls back in the 80s, all of a sudden she's got this indignant moral entity that popped up out of nowhere there. You ought not be stealing my music. The same way with Ulrich and Hetfield, with Metallica. You ought not be stealing our music. Well, why not? You gotta have where is your? You act like you have deontological ethics, but you don't believe in my God or my book here. Where are you getting that stuff? You understand the situation there? And sometimes the situation is much more important than music, but the principle is the same. All right, comments on, anybody want to comment on that? Other people do ethics differently. It's definitely like shopping in a grocery store if you want to get your basis for ethics. I think you can just pick up whatever suits you at the time, but often it doesn't work that way.
What's the similarity between the ought not with Christian conviction? The conscience that you hear that voice.
See, ultimately, I think this should set the tone for that. Are you asking about where areas where Scripture doesn't speak on it?
Yes.
If Scripture doesn't say anything about it, I don't know that we could be dogmatic on it. If Scripture doesn't say anything about it, but we could definitely choose the wise over the unwise there. A lot of times, for example, you get the thing about the question about wine. Was wine in the Bible fermented? All of it's grape juice for about 10, 14 days.
Right.
That's what happens after that. And in that culture, it just seemed to be part of their culture. It ferments, and there's not much you can do about it. Sometimes you could boil it and create a syrup to make a syrupy drink, and sometimes you could keep it submerged in water, but that's very rare. Now, having said that, what a lot of people in favor of the wine, what they don't bring out a lot of times is I don't know that the alcohol content was as high. They didn't have sugarcane fields and all that sort of stuff. And the other thing everybody fails to bring out is in the average kitchen in the Roman world, Greek world, and the Jewish world, you had in the kitchen you had a calyx, which was a wine mixing bowl, which is common as a toaster in our kitchen. And so they did drink wine like 10 parts water to 1 part wine. If you were poor, I guess the richer you are, the more you didn't have to water it down. But see, back to your question there is a wise and unwise approach to all that kind of stuff. We could go the rest of the morning on that.
It brings up, so I had a conversation with a church guide, young lady.
That's your problem.
She had family and she lived and she grew up in Tennessee,
Yeah.
church guide there. But her husband was military and they were in Michigan.
Yeah.
The church guide in Michigan allowed a group to come in and sell liquor in their parking lot. And they got a portion of the proceeds.
Yeah.
Because, well, they were gonna sell it anyway, gave them a safe place to do it, more or less. And I said, what? She goes, that's exactly what I said, but that's what they did there. And that's how we built this for the church. And I talked to my dad, who's church bishop, and he went, I never heard of that. I said, me either, but I don't know. I guess it's that they're gonna sell it anyway, we get a portion of the profits type of thing. Where does that
Take
come
away the
from?
lottery.
I don't
You pay your
know.
tithe.
I know on one occasion, John Wesley went somewhere to preach, and the pastor showed him behind the pulpit where there was a bottle of some kind of spiritual whatever, and Wesley was as surprised that the guy offered it to him, but the guy was surprised that Wesley wouldn't, you need a squig to loosen yourself up. You can run into some strange things out there. I just tell the students there's a website called 50 Reasons Not to Drink, and some of them are kind of kooky, but there's some common sense there.
Mhm.
Not to sell it in the church parking lot.
Yeah, that's not gonna be wise on your testimony, I don't think. Let me run through one more definition, and we'll it's on page 8, and we'll take a look. And the word there is
That's all
moral
right.
equivalence. And what that means is, equivocation, that's the misleading use of a term with more than one meaning or sense, glossing over which meaning is intended. You're deliberately misleading people by using different definitions of stuff, and it might be better just to go all the way down to the bottom of the page there. When you hear people say abortion is no different than capital punishment.
Mm-hmm.
What's the common denominator between abortion and a capital punishment? So the death penalty. A person's dying, right? Well, to say there's no difference in killing a baby in its womb and executing a criminal that's just shot 9 people, you're deliberately changing definitions there. You're unable to see how that is not anything like this over here. I've heard this 1,000 times over the past 4 years. Trump's no different than Hitler. Yes, he is. Come on. Where's Trump murdering, burning 10 million people in death camp? Guantanamo Bay. That's where we keep Islamic and ISIS terrorists. Guantanamo Bay still in it. Guantanamo Bay is no different than Auschwitz. Yes, it is. Those prisoners that we have down there in Guantanamo Bay, they live very well. All of them have gained 60 to 80 pounds since they got there. One of them even filed a lawsuit that his soccer ball didn't have enough air in it. Another one of them filed a lawsuit that they gave him deodorant that wasn't antiperspirant. They look better in Guantanamo Bay than a lot of them. They're not down there being slaved. There's no difference. Christian fundamentalists are no different than Islamic fundamentalists. I hear that a lot. Well, yes, they are. You see how you're twisting the definitions there? A fetus is no different than an appendix. You're taking something out of a woman's body that she doesn't want there. And you can't see the difference between that. An infected organ versus a human being that has all the DNA of being a full-fledged person there. You can't see that. So for me, one example of that, we'll let it go, is several years ago they did a movie called Munich. And in 72 or 73, Islamic terrorists went into the World Olympics. I don't know if any of you, most of you guys remember that. Went into the World Olympics, and they shot 11 Israeli athletes, just killed them, shot a piece with an AK-47. I was just out of high school, doing artwork and all that. I kept asking the guys working on it. I said, Doc, why is nobody doing anything? Nobody did anything. Well, the Israelis did something. The world did nothing. The Israelis did something. They set up a team, and it took several years. But they set this team out, and they caught every one of those guys and assassinated them. Well, see, in the movie, Spielberg, and I like Spielberg movies, but he got lost in there. He's saying that those Israeli assassins were no different than Hezbollah. You see how you're either twisting the definitions or you're blending them together to mean the same thing. That's simply justice. Israel could not get justice from the UN. They couldn't get it from anybody, so they decided to do justice themselves. They're not the ones that went in and killed Arab athletes. Anyway, that's what moral equivalence is when you say that X is no different than Y, when there's all kinds of difference. You're playing with the definitions, you're doing misleading analogies and that kind of thing. So I just thought I throw that into the class, sometimes that is one of the problems in trying to do ethics nowadays. You can't say this is no different from this when the ethical implications are as far as the East is from the West. It's just tangled up in language. You can't say the World Trade Center. You can't call that a tragedy. Now, that's just plain outright murder. Yeah, it was tragic, but it's way young. You have to be careful with the words you use. It was murder. The World Trade Center was murder. It's not just a tragedy. Well, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm trying to get 42 classes in here. So we better take a break.
You're doing fine. Thank you. Before we take our break, let me just say one thing very fast, and I'm going to let you go. I recognized Pastor Brian earlier. I should have recognized our bishop. He's here today auditing this class with us as well. And so we